have my awesome co-host Kendra Reiber here today as well. And we also have a special guest here, Dr. Michele Finneran. Welcome to the show, both Kendra and Michele. And thanks for being here. We got a ton of things to talk about and appreciate if you could tell us a little bit about your background because we'd like to know more about all the things that you have to share today.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me on the show. I appreciate it. So my name is Dr. Michele Finneran. I have a private practice called Beck & Associates located in Coral Springs, Florida, which is in South Florida. And I'm a licensed mental health counselor, and I have a PhD in conflict resolution and dispute analysis from Nova Southeastern University in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And I'm a clinician, a practitioner, but I'm also a researcher. So I do a little bit of both. I do the clinical work, and I also do publishing and writing and researching, both. My primary practice is made up of first responders, law enforcement officers, firefighters, nurses, mental health counselors, people that serve the community, the public in a way that's helpful. So that's mainly my main practice, my main focus of my practice. But of course, my expertise is in conflict resolution. So I see a lot of families, I see a lot of marriages, I see a lot of multiple macro level issues. I work with some cities and municipalities to kind of help them with their organizational structure and situations like that. So the research on the research spectrum is and the PhD side of things. I wrote a book called Surviving Domestic Abuse, Formal and Informal Supports and Services. Right. And that was published 2 years ago. And basically it talks about domestic violence victims' accounts, survivors' accounts of what worked in the system formally and informally, and what did not work. I think it's safe to say that we have a flawed system that needs some fixing. And so I got information according to the survivors of what was helpful and what was not when going through a domestic violence, domestic abuse situation and dynamic.
I had a question that along those lines, actually in Florida, because I had a person reach out, a mom from Florida, and she had said Pacific alienation syndrome has changed over the years, and she had made a point that it's changed since the 1980s. Is there something you could tell us about what has changed and what parental alienation is by definition?
Yeah, parental alienation is kind of like a term that is transcended and became more aware of, particularly in the court system, with families that are going through divorce. So what it is this one parent, what they do is they kind of like block access to the other parent from their children, and they don't, they interfere in that dynamic. And so that's the alienation part. And a lot of research has shown with parent alienation, it seems like a lot of fathers experience the parent alienation. And a lot of research and statistics shows that it is an underlying form of abuse and neglect and viewed in the court system, and it's becoming more and more of a hot topic in the legal system.
And
go ahead, Matt.
Sorry, I don't interrupt. I would just follow up. I was just thinking, you had made a comment in what you had sent for the preparation materials about adults not necessarily reconciling with a parent who's been alienated. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, because I find it curious, if the child has been alienated, why they don't necessarily reconcile as an adult or when they get older, but there must be some sort of impact that perhaps you could tell us about and address. What happened?
Yeah. So when it changes, because as a child gets, like when a child, with a divorced parent, has a contentious divorce with their ex-partner, and they start to I'm talking younger children, start to bash the the parent, and start to degrade them, and start to alienate them. The child seems to be influenced by the parent that does that at that time. However, as the child develops and grows, into more of a individualization and more of a mature adult, they see a kind of a switch in how that turn happens, where the child, now adult, starts to have resentment and discontent with the parent that has alienated the child and has bashed the other parent. So at young age, it's influential and it's for the young child. And but as the child gets older, they start to realize what has happened, and the emotions actually kind of shift, and they start to have resentment for the parent when they were younger, to isolate and to bash the other parent.
Okay.
So, Michelle, I'm interested in that because I am probably a little different than the statistics, because I am a mother that has been a targeted parent of alienation. And so I have two young boys, 15 and 11 now.
Okay.
And so I'm very interested in and we had kind of talked before previously on a podcast that I had a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
And I thought it was just so interesting. I'd like for you to highlight for our listeners where the kids are at in certain age levels when they go through a divorce, right? And how to best handle that at their age level, whether it's toddler, teen. If you can maybe kind of walk us through that, I think that would be great for our listeners.
Yeah. So I think the hardest, I would say the hardest clientele, and regardless of parental alienation or divorce, is my 15-year-old boys. They are
teens are hard anyways, divorce or not, right?
Teens are hard. Teens are hard, but I really find 15-year-old boys are really the hardest. They're going through so much, just without anything else added to the component. They're going through so much, like hormonally and bodily. Not that girls are, but they behaviorally respond differently than girls do. So they're the hardest population. So I think, the emotional impact that divorce has in development, regardless of where the development is, and depending on the child's age, impacts in different ways developmentally, depending on the age. For instance, young children, we're talking about, like, toddlers, infants, people that between 3 and like 7, they often struggle to understand how to navigate between the two homes. And they do the research has shown they do a lot of worrying, and trying to figure out, because they're trying to figure out each household dynamic, which is different. So they do a lot of worrying about, like, that. And they also worry about, if their parents stop loving them, or one another someday, and their parents may stop loving them, and may be the cause of why this different situation has occurred.
Can you give us some examples of what they would worry about between the two households? Is it rules? Is it more their personal belongings? Like, what's important to them when they're young?
So yes, the worry I would suggest maybe the worry would be more about, like, if they caused this, or if one parent doesn't love them enough, and that they're the reason why this happened. The issue that comes up is the adjustment between the two homes, and trying to navigate that, because it's different. So it's just trying to, and that brings on a little level of anxiety, because what's expected in one home, if not the parents doing the same thing in different homes, is different from the other home, which causes some anxiety and anticipatory anxiety, if not explained what the expectations are in one home to the next. And that's something that I think is really important for children in general, just regardless, is have like a preface of, before it takes place, like, what happens, what's going to happen, what is happening, and kind of give them a heads up so they're not their minds aren't wandering and anticipating something and having a lot of anxiety, and just having that more of a reassurance, regardless, that prefacing that for children helps their anxiety levels.
So just being clear with what's expected at each household.
Exactly. Being clear of what's expected, particularly if the households are running differently. When divorced parents get along and collaborate, the goal really is for the parents to run the same type of households in different households. But so oftentimes that doesn't happen. But if that doesn't happen, just being really communicatively clear with the child of what to expect.
Okay, great. And sorry, I interrupted. So if you want to go to the next level past young children.
So for grade school children, they often worry that the divorce was their fault. And they start the process of blaming themselves and bashing themselves, and which affects them interpersonally. They fear that because of them, again, like we do with young children, that if they do something wrong, they're adding to the divide, they're adding to the stress. So they're, unconsciously a little bit more on pins and needles, and they're more or less afraid to mess up and make a mistake or fail. But they often do feel, the grade school children often do feel that if not reassured that, they are loved, just because me and your dad or mom don't love each other, that you are still loved. And this is not your fault. That reassurance, that confirmation for the grade school child and the young children are very, very important for the parents to relay that, because that's where they go.
Is there any specific examples where parents could demonstrate that, right? If we put them to bed and we constantly reassure them, that they're loved and we both love them, and not talking in a contentious divorce or relationship, but where parents are actually talking positively about each other, and encouraging them, your dad still loves you, your mom still loves you. Is there anything else that we can do specifically to help them?
Oh my God, yes. Yes, so much. I think it's so very important for the child to witness the divorced mom and dad get along and collaborate with each other, regardless of being divorced. That is super important to model for the child, because what it does, it leaves them secured, and it leaves them knowing that even though my parents aren't together, they're both on my team. And it makes discipline, consequences, behavior consistently, when there is collaboration with the divorced parents together, just more of a smoother fine oil machine households for the child, and more of a ease into adjustment. I think that is probably the biggest takeaway that parents can do that are divorced when there's not a contentious relationship, is actually show, like, visibly those divorced parents getting along and communicating and collaborating together visibly.
And if you're in a contentious divorce, what does that look like if they can't get along?
Yeah, well, that looks like if there is no collaboration and there is no communication, the goal is not to relay that to the children, not to, obviously, putting on a good front for your
fake
children.
Fake it till you make it.
fake it till you make it. And the reason why I say that is because that's your relationship. Sure. With the parent, with the ex-spouse. That's your relationship. That's not the relationship with the child's relationship with the with the divorced parent. Mm-hmm. So regardless, These are feelings that you have because of your relationship. The goal is not to interfere or negatively impact their relationship with the person that's contentious in the divorce. And that means negate bashing, negate name calling, negate talking down about the other parent, trying to encourage the relationship with the other parent, just try to be as supportive behind the scenes with navigating that relationship. And, like I said early on, if that's done, your child that will grow into adult will not have resentment or anger towards you because you try to facilitate that encouragement.
Okay, great. And sorry, I interrupted again. So maybe we can move on to teenagers now. And our favorite, right?
Yeah.
Divorced or not, they're a challenge.
Yeah. Teenagers in divorce situations, we expect our teenagers, particularly our teenagers, to be resilient and to bounce back pretty quickly. And sometimes that works, depending on the type of divorce that happens, and sometimes it just doesn't. So I would probably err that many teenagers become angry, and regardless if they understand, they're just more angered, particularly my 15-year-old boys. And they usually end up, regardless of the parents' efforts, because they're so angry, usually blaming, it's because it's easier to do that, one parent over the other, and using some type of nepotism with one parent. Usually it's the nepotism usually goes toward the favoritism usually goes more toward the parent that's a little bit more harsher and aggressive and a little bit more strict because there's more fear there, I would say. So I know that sounds kind of backwards why that would happen, but it typically behaviorally that's what teenagers kind of do. They just tend to be more cooperative with a parent that's more challenging to deal with. That's what I would suggest with teenagers. It's probably there may be just more or less resentment and anger toward one parent over the other, and it's usually the easier parent, or the more I wouldn't say easier, the more collaborative parent, and the more parent the children feel more comfortable with, usually gets the brunt of things.
Yeah, sometimes the nice people don't win, right?
I mean, yeah.
You try and you don't win. Yeah. I have one more question, and Mick, I'm sorry, I'll pass the stage on to you. I have one more question about this because it's very interesting. I've always heard that children tend to align with the same sex during the divorce if it's a little contentious. Can you maybe address that a little bit, whether it is, our young children, grade school, or teenagers, or whether that is false? Because you just mentioned that they can align more with the one that's a little bit more strict. So I just wonder how that plays into it. At teenagers, when they're starting to go through the hormones, and if you're getting a divorce, then do they align with the same sex parent?
This is for me?
Yes.
Yes, they do. They do. They typically do align with the same sex parents. We see this with, when I did my research on survivors of domestic violence, the daughters definitely were impacted, very much so with the mothers, and they do align regardless if there's a detached emotional bond there, what have you. And the boys align with the fathers, particularly at a 15-year-old, 16-year-old age, because of all the changes that are there they are going through. However, with that being said, if the father's per se with the son is unapproachable and is doesn't evoke an interest in their 15-year-old son, and doesn't engage with participation in a parenting process with their son, their own, then they will not align with the father. They will not feel comfortable. And so what they end up doing is they go to the parent that they feel the most comfortable with. And that's when those conversations that fathers and sons have, really, they go toward the mom. If the 15-year-old son does not feel comfortable with their same-sex parent.
Okay. Thank you, Michelle.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
I had a question earlier when, excuse me, we were thinking about going back between home and home, which certainly does make a whole lot of sense because you can have different rules and it can be very confusing for a child. I was curious about a parent who alienates their partner but simply moves. What's the impact of moving? And that is they're completely isolated in another state. They move around from place to place. And for a child who has got only one parent, but the parent who has them moves from place to place, what kind of impact does this have, if any, upon the child who is one parent household and then moving from place to place?
Well, depending on the state, legally, that can't happen without an agreement. You can't, obviously in this state of Florida, you can't take your child from, if divorced, you can't take your child to another state legally without consent from the other parent. So there's not, in this state, I don't know if it depends on the state, but a lot of it has to be agreed upon legally. It's a legal matter. It becomes a legal matter and a child custody matter when that before that even happens. That has to be legally discussed and documented. If you can't just pick up and leave, that's called kidnapping. Your child, undocumented and not legally done properly, that could be considered kidnapping and criminal. So legally, what has to happen is if the parent decides to move out of area or even in a different county, all that has to be legally approved and documented in order for that for the parents to have legal permission to do that. In this state, I don't know how it is from state to state, but in this state, that's how it works. And if they don't get consent and they don't go through the legal system, they can get in a lot of legal trouble.
The reason I'm asking because it's more common than you might think.
I was going to say, Mick has a very interesting story on how it happened to him.
And it happens to others. I mean, it sounds like things are decent in Florida, but I can guarantee I was living in Pennsylvania and I found out on police radio our child was 3,000 miles away in California. Then I've had people in California who find that their child ended up on the East Coast, 3,000 miles away.
Oh my gosh.
So that's why I'm asking. And what you're saying is I understand the complexity of different states and different jurisdictions. And I can verify, I thought this was kidnapping, but unfortunately no one else did. And that's part of the process of trying to say, okay, I got to get child restored and what have you.
Yeah.
That's really why I'm asking about just the moving part. So
yeah, because I think, Mick, speaking to your story, is you didn't have anything legally. You just came home one day and you were married and then you weren't, right? Because she was, right? So it was just a very quick separation. Goodbye. And then I also think, Michelle, he's referencing some of the narcissists that we deal with in a divorce, right? And so anything legally, they just think they're above the law. So they're going to do whatever they want. So I think maybe that's why he's asking that, is just how does moving in general affect the kids? Because we know it happens one way or another.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, dealing with a narcissistic parent is super, super hard. And that's why it's very important when dealing with a narcissistic parent because they think they're above the law is to get the law involved somehow, some way, because they're not above the law, and they're gonna formulate a real big reality check when faced with a judge or faced with attorneys or whatever the case may be. So, regardless, any type of transitional move is just hard in general for the child. Yeah. But the way that was done in your situation, Mick, makes it hard for everybody involved, except for the narcissistic parent that is making the decision solely to make this change for you as a parent and for the child that's impacted. So, it's not a good situation for the parent that is left behind, and for the child that doesn't have any type of power or control to make any decisions.
And that's why I was just asking, any move can have an impact on any child with an intact family because it's an investment, right?
Absolutely.
But then there are the situations where you have the child in a one-parent home, and the one parent takes the child from state to state or county to county, and then it's just unfortunate for the child who really is stuck in the middle. And in those situations or situations like that, let's say, presumably it's a mom, because I'm also have a lot of experience in inner cities where you see it's the single mom household. And the mom has a very difficult time with the discipline, and also the research seems to show what you're suggesting is that it's difficult for a mom. Well, obviously, because the man or the father is generally the disciplinarian in many ways. So it really gets out of hand for both the mom, who can't handle the young boy, like you're saying, the 15-year-old boy. Like, yeah, I must have been fortunate. I played a lot of sports and I had a very happy 15-year-old time, but I had an intact family. But
right.
I think you can distract kids in a way because they do have a lot of hormones and a lot of energy. But I always say try to get them into something like the sports or playing a musical instrument, anything, because they have so much energy. But I was saying for a mom, they tend to be less of the disciplinarian, and then the child unfortunately doesn't have the father figure who's going to keep them in line. I mean, they're bigger and stronger. I mean, it just comes down to bluntly saying it that way.
Well, just in line with that, and speaking to Kendra's point, this is why the same-sex parent is so very important. The involvement of the same-sex parent, because that 15-year-old boy needs to identify and wants to identify with the parent, and that's why if the father is engaged and participatory and want to do that without negating any type of parent alienation, which prevents that from happening.
Right.
That's obviously a good thing for your child that's the same sex. And with that being said, there in this state there is an age, and I think the age is like 14 or 15, where the child actually has a say legally as to what they want to do, and more of a say in regards to where they want to be and how, and positionally, so that's important. And usually a 15-year-old kind of has their own cell phone or whatever the case may be, and you don't have to wait necessarily until they're 18 or to be free of gaining a relationship, unless it makes it harder for the child to have a relationship at 15 or 14 or whatever the case may be.
So I want to go back to something you were touching on, Michelle, earlier too, is the disciplinarian. So if the mother is the disciplinarian and the father is looked at as the fun parent, I know you had said that they might align with more of the strict, but will they align with more the fun at a certain age where they say, oh, well, if I don't have any rules and I can get away with things and I never get punished, and will they align with that parent at some point?
Early on. Yeah. Early on. Yes. Early on. But that has a counterintuitive effect. I call it the Ronald McDonald syndrome, where the parent is the fun parent, takes them to McDonald's, gets everything that they want, doesn't provide structure or routine. It seems at the time that that's exactly what the teenager wants.
That's what I would want, right? With my parents, I would want no rules, and I call the shots. And
who wants to abide by rules, right?
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So of course, it would make sense for I was talking about somebody who is a little bit more demonstrative and have more fear impact for the child, that the child doesn't feel they fear that they have to align with the more aggressive parent. But for a fun parent, if you're a fun parent and you're a Ronald McDonald parent, then yeah, we're going to have a great time. We're going to have a party every night. It's a slumber party, and they will align. And that's when the nepotism becomes alignment with that parent. Short term. In the aftermath, as time progresses, and as the child evolves, you might not be liked at the moment as a 15-year-old or younger. Again, that switches. We see the research studies show that in adulthood, there's more respect, there's more security, and the person that provides the structure, the routine, the discipline, the parental responsibility. There's more of a relationship in the adulthood that we see happening. And that's really important to take away. Don't at this moment, because you're feeling the brunt as with the 15-year-old son or daughter, whatever the case may be, don't let that discourage you. Keep doing the consistency, keep doing the structure, keep doing the disciplinarian, because as an adult, that's going to be reared, particularly not just as they individualize from their family of origin, but particularly as they become parents. They need that model. They need that example to execute when they have their own family and their own kids. So right now you're feeling the brunt, but that will reverse as the child becomes more of an adult and individualizes and really immatures and see things. They will see things much differently. But not now, because they're having fun.
Sure. I'd be the same way if I was younger, right? Yeah. I mean, the Disney parent is what I call it.
Right? Yeah. Everyone has a name for it. I call it the Ronald McDonald. It's because the reason why I call it this is because one time me and my parents were in McDonald's having a cup of coffee, and I was watching, looking around my environment. I saw a dad, and this is not to target dads, but in this particular situation, I saw a dad having lunch with his son. Okay. And I was watching them have lunch, and there was absolutely no engagement. There's no communication. They're just eating. And I see the father under the table texting, very disengaged. They're eating in silence. And then the father can go back and said, I had lunch with my son.
Sure.
It's just checking that box. It's a Ronald McDonald dad. That's why I got that phrase. So made up my own terminology.
I like that. Well, Mick, do you have any other questions, or do we want to wrap up with Michele today?
Well, I would suggest this: if Dr. Michele would be considerate to come back another time. I think we got a lot of great information. So I had enough for today, but yeah, there's a lot more. I'm wondering if we could talk you into coming back another time.
Absolutely. I would love to. I really enjoyed my first interview with Kendra. I'm enjoying this interview with Kendra and you, Mick. So absolutely, I'd be more than happy to come back on another episode, on a future episode.
That'd be awesome. Before we close out, though, could people get a hold of you, and what would you suggest? I understand that you've got some research and maybe a book or two you could suggest for them.
Sure. So the best way to contact me is through my website, and it's just www.Vec and Associates, V as in Victor, ECC and Associates.com. And on that website, you can see all my resources. There's blogs. There's a specific page to get a hold of me. on that website, contact page that goes right directly to my direct email. And I think there's also in that contact like all my information, my phone number, my social media accounts, everything. The way you can order my book through Amazon, everything is there on the website. The website is there. We're revamping it, but it's still active. It's still useful. It has a lot of good information on it. And it has a lot about my business and my team. It has a lot about informative and resources in terms of blogs and research oriented on different topics that I'm seeing in my clinical practice. It's just a really good resource to have. And there's obviously a way to contact me on that website.
All right.
Wonderful.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I want to encourage real fast, Mick, before we get off here, I want to encourage listeners, if you listen to Michele today and you have questions, you can also submit them to Mick and I, and we will ask them on our next episode with you, because I think that's fantastic and you're a wealth of information.
And
well, that's a great idea, because you want to target the audience's needs.
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
How do they get a hold of us? But it's the aftermathhealing@gmail.com. Thanks for mentioning that, Kendra. Good reminder. And if you like what you're hearing on the Aftermath, make sure that you subscribe, like, share, and positively review the Aftermath. So until next time, thanks again for Dr. Michele for being with us, and Kendra, take care until next time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.